for Joyce until she gets here. Let's see. So first thing is to announce we're still open for business, despite the weather. And first thing on our agenda is approval of the minutes of January 2nd. Is there a motion to approve?
Second that motion.
Okay, Richard made the motion.
Apparently so.
Apparently so.
I thought you did.
Yeah, okay. Seconded. Any discussion on approval of the minutes of January 2nd? All those in favor?
Aye.
Next is addition to the agenda. I have 4 additions. Budget transfer, transfer station request for a used container. 3 was highway union contract sign off. 4th was tax delinquencies. So is there a motion to add those?
I so move.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Any other additions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Next we have communications. I have one that I thought was very timely important from our social service director, Heather Deneen, that we keep in mind the people that have been affected by the shutdown of the federal government, and we have seen an increase in need at our local food pantry, which is helped by our food and fuel fund. So any donations to the Cornwall food and fuel fund would be most welcome in this time of need. Hopefully that will sort itself out, but there is reduction in food aid and other necessities for people that are in need. So that's the word from Heather. Speaking of Heather, one thing we have done is also, I've talked to her, we did say we were going to advertise that job as a permanent position starting next month or so. So we're going to start advertising that, and we'll interview people for that job next month. So that will be on our list of things to do next month. Next we have public comment. Do we have any public comments? Welcome to the public here. Phil Hart is here.
I do. Is it time
Sure.
to go forward? Okay.
Yes.
What I'm going to talk about has already been written about in the Lakeville Journal on January 17th. Except if you'd like to look in at that issue. And Lakeville Journal, January 17th, and the Republican American, and that was by Blake Levitt. And the Republican American by Lynn Worthington was on January 10th in the Litchfield County section. And what I have to talk about is the Cricket Valley Energy Company, which is in Dover. And those 2 newspapers have given a pretty good running account of something which I think involves Cornwall. Last fall, I attended an informational and organizational meeting which had to do with Cricket Valley Energy. And 2 things came out of that. One, a group of people who were pretty committed to trying to stop it from going online. And a second group of people who felt the proper approach was to gather some kind of baseline data on what the pernicious emissions are, which are already in the air here in Cornwall and all of this particular section of Connecticut. And the reason for gathering that baseline data was so that we could find out what the difference was between what it is now and what it may become when they go online. It is one of the largest propane generating plants in the eastern United States. The goal was to monitor for all these the baseline data. And Kent School has generously purchased a large monitoring unit which will be located on campus. And their hope is that there will be a number of other smaller data gathering machines in and around our area, which can feed back to the main unit, and so we can get a very accurate readout on how much the Cricket Valley Energy Plant has added to the load, which is already here. I mean, most of us see we think of our air as being pretty clean, and it is pretty clean, but nevertheless, there are a fair number of contaminants in the air. And there's rightful concern, especially in Kent, and especially in the Milford, and I think all the way up into our area, as to what additionally goes into the air. Many organizations have already expressed support. HVA, the Atmog Land Trust, the town of Kent, I think it was reported they were putting in close to $5,000, trying to figure out what line in the budget that's going to come from. Also the town of Washington. And basically what this is about is attempting to fundraise to purchase these units so that we can get this kind of a readout. Cornwall, by the way, already has monitoring at Mohawk, and they are not interested in supplying additional readout units in this area, which is kind of unfortunate. More are definitely needed. What I'm asking you now is if you would be willing to put this on the agenda for next time. I know two people in Cornwall who would like to speak to this issue. I think there's some question of what you can do, if that has to do with a donation, whether it has to do with letters of support, but I think it's a right topic for the selectmen in Cornwall.
Okay, thank you, Phil. What I might do in the meantime is contact our representative and senators who I believe are on the Environment Committee of the legislature, because clearly the town of Cornwall can be upset about things, but if this is New York State,
Right.
our influence is limited, and it would seem like getting the state, I mean, I don't understand why the state doesn't, if they already have one up there, why don't they do more if this is a big deal? So I will try. I'm always in favor of spending somebody else's money first.
There was a fair amount of anger about during the permitting process. There was a feeling that there was not an adequate public comment time. It was incredible how far along the construction had taken place before people even knew what was going on down there.
Right. And the second question is if contamination is found in Kent and Washington, can the state of Connecticut sue the state, or I mean, we can find problems, but the question is, what's the legal remedy of going to be if we find that?
Right.
So anyway, I'll try to get a hold of those folks and see what I can do. Thank you for that update. We did hear from Kate Fragang about that. She's pulling some information together about that. Okay, any other public comments? All right, next we have Roger Kane with Lake Road Culvert. Roger's been working with Leonard Engineering, trying to get us some a proposal together to do some preliminary engineering on the Lake Road Culvert, which is our next area of work that we hope to get done this construction season, because we need to complete work financed under the town's bonding by next April, and winter is a hard time to do it, so we're going to try to get this going.
I've had several conversations with Dave Batiste of Leonard Engineering, and we've pared down an original proposal to a revised proposal, which I believe you all have copies of now. The only change that, in talking to Dave further, he was asking for 120 days following the receipt of data, and I've asked him to have his preliminary engineering report completed by May 1st, assuming he gets the data necessary. Some of the data comes from the federal government, and he's a bit concerned that he can't just order it up right now. It's all data that's in computers, but you need a computer operator to send it. So I think that will probably be resolved.
Is that one of the areas that's shut down?
Probably.
Yes.
All the data stuff is.
Right, all the federal data centers. So if we go forward with the proposal that he's submitted, and it's for preliminary engineering, and it essentially what he's going to be doing is trying to determine the size and the elevation of whatever structure we want to put in there. One of the things that we have talked about is putting a lining there's an existing 72-inch pipe. And this takes all the water that comes down through the headwaters of the Hollenbeck River. This is more than 3 miles from Town Road, essentially south to Johnson Road on Route 43. So all the land to the west is part of this contributing watershed, and much of it now to the actually to the right, to the left. We'll go east and west. Easier for me anyway. The land to the west is very obviously draining towards Town Street. The land to the east comes across Route 43, which works like a giant dam, and when the beaver allow it, the water comes through. The beaver have done a lot of work in that area, and which is both good and bad. I mean, it has created a giant sponge, and the nice thing about sponges, they slowly absorb water, and they slowly release water. So we've been able to get away with a 72-inch pipe for 30 some odd years, maybe more. Every once in a while, the road overtops, the water comes over the road, and fortunately in that area, that's not a drastic situation. But the culvert that carries the water under the road is collapsing. I've been in the culvert in a dry spell, able to walk through it. There are good-sized holes, much more than pinholes, through the sides of the culvert, so that eventually, without some remediation, the culvert will slowly collapse. So we can put a liner in it and put a supplemental pipe alongside it, and that would be the most economical thing to do. Whether that's going to be adequate or not is really what we're asking Leonard engineers to determine for us. It seems like we're getting a lot more rain. We're getting 100-year storms every 10 years. So I guess I have to recommend that we go forward. If we're going to do this construction project this year, we've essentially got to get the preliminary engineering done so that we can turn this over to a design engineer, which I hope to make part of a design build contract. The last couple of contracts we've done have been done that way, have been pretty reasonable and time effective.
So our goal is to get his work done in May and try to go out to bid in June or something like
Well,
that?
by the end of May, I'd like to have the bid out so that they have time to do some design work. So if he can have his work completed by May 1st, we should have the bid out before the end of May.
So in this, what we're asking Leonard to do is the hydrology study to determine the volume of water, in essence, the size of the culvert, the size of the opening,
Right.
and the elevation that it has to be to maintain, to not create any backwater.
Exactly.
That's the big picture of what he's going to be doing.
Right.
That's,
One of
that's,
the aspects, he also needs survey work done, and it's difficult to do that in the winter time. We've talked about going and using an ice boring machine to, if they can walk out on the ice and drill holes, then they can do the survey work through the ice, which is not uncommon, but otherwise we're going to have to do the survey work after the fact, which isn't all that difficult. It's a little more difficult, but he feels he can do it.
are there things that we're not including in this that we're asking the design build bid people, and we haven't gotten there yet, but it's going to, the design bid people will need to do that could be done by Leonard, so those issues aren't necessarily done differently by different design build people.
Not really. He's going to, Leonard is going to have this survey work done in order to locate it, both what's called horizontal and vertical. The vertical control is much more important as far as what's called the bottom chord elevation, which is how low can the structure be before it's going to start obstructing water, creating a backwater. So he'll take care of all that. As far as his surveyor could do more than that. In the original proposal that he had submitted, there was a lot more survey work done. And I asked him to not include that at this time, let the construction survey team take care of that. So some of the work that he had proposed has been trimmed off this estimate. This estimate is now a little over $22,000, which I think is an appropriate preliminary engineering estimate. I don't want them to do any more, where I think that the bidding contractors will be much more cost effective in their work.
They'll be more competitive in how they're gonna,
Exactly.
how they're gonna price it out. I mean, the hydrology is probably the single most important thing in the whole,
Exactly, yeah.
the whole,
What should we do out there? What can we do? If it's possible, similar to the Flat Rock Road, I'd like to make a determination on the type of structure we want. Then if, like over at Flat Rock Road, the town purchases, orders the structure, then the town pays for it. The contractor doesn't have to finance the town's purchase, which is what happens when you go to a typical bid, that the contractor then has to go out, borrow the money, very possibly, buy the whatever unit we're going to put in, and then they have to wait to get paid. So we're paying for all that. So we can eliminate that by pre-purchasing the structure, which is what we did on Flat Rock Road. That worked out quite well and very cost effective.
would that be predicated on the type of structure?
Of course, yes.
Um,
But regardless of what type it is, we can still do the same, whether we just put in a supplemental pipe, or whether we put in something, precast concrete, or whatever it is, we can do it in the same fashion. And essentially, we're looking for a contractor to install,
Right.
the structure.
Do you think as part of the study, he will give us a couple options, such as an extra pipe versus a whole new deal?
I don't think he's going to put that on paper. I think that we can easily talk about that as far
Right.
as if we need X number of square feet of waterway opening, what elevation can we put it at? And, we'll talk hypothetically, but I doubt if he's going to be designing it for us.
Right.
as we're talking about this now, I'm realizing when you're talking about the size of the opening, the size of the opening and the elevation, this, the pipe that exists isn't going to move. It won't be moved if we put a second pipe in. We're not going to move the first pipe.
Correct.
And therefore, there could be an issue with the height of the current pipe. The elevation of the current pipe could be poorly placed for the purpose of,
Well, you usually can deal with that by making that, if necessary, an overflow pipe. If the new structure, let's say we put in a bigger pipe alongside it at a lower elevation, well, that's going to take most of the flow, but only if there was a large,
a large
rain
volume.
event.
Oh, I see.
That as the water comes up, then it would go into the old pipe, which we then had to put a liner in and reinforced, so that it becomes an overflow pipe. It may not be 72 inches, maybe down to something like 68 inches, but that pipe would then become the supplemental pipe, and the primary structure would be perhaps a little larger at a lower elevation.
Okay.
Okay. So, based on that recommendation, I'll make a motion to accept Leonard's proposed task order for professional services of $22,800 to do preliminary engineering on replacing the culvert on Lake Road. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Under discussion, the only thing I would recommend that we do before we sign off on it is under item 4 of the schedule, we change what they had at 120 days to by May 1st, 2019, assuming receipt of the data, so on, the rest of that sentence.
Right. Okay. Assuming receipt.
And I did talk to Dave about that. He's aware that if this gets approved, that the
Right.
revision to this.
And he's somewhat restricted in doing some work until better weather and the ground thaws and everything else. So even if it takes,
Not so much.
does he have to do it? But he has to get a surveyor out there, right?
Well, I think that if we can walk on the ice,
Uh-huh.
you can establish the elevation of the ice, then you can drill down through the ice, establish what becomes, I mean, you've got a lot of mud down there, you're gonna probe down in the mud, where it becomes solid. He'll be able to establish the profile of the water course. When he gets up into the more swampy areas, I don't think that's critically important, but it's also, the ice won't be as rigid and be more difficult. So I think he can get pretty much what he wants to do if it stays cold enough, or if the ice all goes away. But I'm going to assume it's going to stay cold for a while, and we might be able to go out there and with an ice boring tool,
Okay.
bore through the ice, then measure down to the bottom or the top of the ice.
Good. Okay, any more discussion?
How much information is required from federal government? From
They
the-
have a whole flood plain plan for that board course. All the way up to, Dave was actually able to show it to me on his computer. It's available, online, but it has to be, there's a lot more detail that has to come along with it. It does show the size of the watershed. It's a very large watershed.
So he's probably able to do some preliminary work with the information he currently
Yes.
has.
A lot of it can be done with the computer.
And maybe he just has to sharpen it a little bit when he gets the final numbers from this is coming from the Army Corps.
Actually, it's the FEMA.
Oh, from FEMA, that's right, right,
Yes.
for the flood insurance.
So I really don't know what smoke and mirrors he uses to come up with these numbers, but that's why he wants to get $22,800 for it.
Okay.
I have to, put faith in his hands. He's done a lot of work for us. And, I haven't been disappointed yet.
Speaking of his work, he did a hydraulic analysis of Mill Brook down by the bridge there. Would that include flood probabilities or whatever, because they're looking at a site near there for the sewer thing? Would he have any useful information on that? Or would that just be specific to the bridge?
That would be specific to Mill Brook. I think that more importantly is that same information from the Potomac River.
Okay. Right. All right.
But we're also looking at sites along Mill Brook too.
Yeah.
Okay. But there is data on Mill Brook that he did provide for us.
Mhm.
He actually provided to Malone and McBroom, which were the design engineer for Mohawk Northeast when they replaced Lower River Road. So he provided the hydraulic study on Mill Brook to Malone and McBroom
Uh,
for Mohawk Northeast.
Okay. So, any more discussion? All right. So, all those in favor of accepting Leonard's task order, say aye.
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 Aye. Unanimous. Good. Thank you again, Roger, for pointing us in the right direction there. So, anyway, we'll, sign this and get it. You can call Batista and tell him
I'll tell them.
it's in the mail or whatever is going on, so
I'll
we'll,
leave this little change as I see it.
Right.
That's what you make that modification when you go to the board sign.
great. Okay, thank you. All right, next we have a new letter from the Conservation Trust requesting the board support for an application to conserve 72 acres of forest on Johnson Road, which we've all received. I think we've all read. We also were copied on a letter from Joanne Watershek to Planning and Zoning Commission on this subject. We've talked about this for a bit at the last two meetings, and I would not propose that we read these letters now, but if anyone here, including Bart, Joanne, or any member of the audience wants to talk about this, now's the time to summarize and see where we're at. And then the board will have some comments and see where we go.
There are two things I'd like to clarify. Number one, the suitability of this project for conservation. But more importantly, that this is not an either-or discussion we're having. The Lakeville Journal had a headline, "Debate goes on over affordable housing versus open space." That's not the case in Cornwall. We have a good working relationship and understanding with the need for affordable housing, and we're perfectly willing to support that. In fact, the act that we're applying for money from the state for, that we're asking your support for, includes farming, affordable housing, and open space. That's the Community Investment Act. We will help the Housing Corporation and anyone else work to tap those state funds, just as we have to save farms and forests. So that's the most important part here, is that we're not in a position of saying we are opposed to affordable housing, or that we want to take some significant amount of land away that could be used for affordable housing. On that last point, I just have a new map here that I'd like to give you. This shows, this is the current map that's under production, showing land in Cornwall that's available for housing, developable. And Cornwall has over 5,700 acres of developable land when you take away steep, preserved, and wet. I wanted to point out that this particular property has 12 acres out of the 72 that are suitable or possibly suitable for housing. So it's not 72 acres that we're taking out of housing, it's at most 12 acres, which in the scheme of things is not significant for Cornwall. The most important part, though, is you can see the core forest runs from Mohawk State Forest, which is to its south, to two preserves totaling 300 acres that we've been given, one from the Knotts Dobbs family and the other from the Green family. And this particular property connects that core forest, 300 acres to, I would guess it's probably 200 acres in Mohawk State Forest. You can see that forest surrounds this and goes through this property. So my basic point is that this property is very much conservation property. It could possibly be used for housing, but it's not material to the housing stock in Cornwall. Furthermore, putting affordable housing in an isolated place like this wouldn't be really good practice for affordable housing. At any rate, the reason we're asking your support, just like we did when we asked your support for the Furnace Brook property, which is 100 acres, we successfully got a grant from the state for that for $403,000 against a purchase price of $622,000. If you support this, our ranking among competing towns for this money from the Community Investment Act will be higher. If you don't support it, our ranking will be lower. It's not money coming from the town, it's money coming from the state through the Community Investment Act. So those are my two basic points. One, this property is most suitable for conservation, not all that important for housing. Two, this is not a competition of us versus them. We support affordable housing. We've had conversations with Mag Cooley to see what ways we can help make this a both and proposition for Cornwall.
Thank you, Bart. Any other comments from the audience? Yes, Joe Pryor.
I have a technical question. So I have this report from Priscilla, which I'm quoting from because I missed the previous presentations. So it's been appraised at $485,000.
475,000.
475. Okay.
And the town appraised it at 622,000.
Right, but it's been appraised at 475.
Yes.
Is that a fee simple interest?
Yes.
Okay. And you're paying 465.
Yes.
So for $10,000 off, which is 2%, you're getting, there's an easement being put across it for no development at all.
In effect,
So
yes.
you're buying the fee simple, but you're praising the non-fee, you're praising the fee simple, but you're taking an interest that doesn't allow development.
That's correct. This in effect is purchasing the development rights. And there'll be an easement in favor of the state that will not allow development of that property.
So what I'm saying is, why would you pay $475 for a property that doesn't have the right to build? Like, what would be the value of the property? Hold on a second.
Yes.
What would be the value of the property if you didn't have the right to build at all?
Usually, rule of thumb, well, first of all, this was appraised by two appraisers, and the basis of the appraisal is fair market value for its highest and best use, meaning development.
Fee simple.
Fee simple, and that's the interest that we are buying. We're buying it fee simple, and the state, and actually the federal government, will give us a percentage of the purchase price to buy the land fee simple. In return, they'll ask for a conservation easement. If we don't buy this, then this land could be sold and developed.
Right, okay, but to clarify, I've been told that the sellers have asked it to be never redeveloped.
They would like to sell it for conservation, yes.
So but they're not
They're-
selling it subject to any restriction, or are they? Is there a deed restriction or easement? When you take
No,
a title?
No,
you take a
they're
title.
not putting the restrictions on. These are three.
Is that a side agreement?
No. These are three hunters who bought this property in 1999, I believe, for $250,000. They told me they're not wealthy hunters, and what they're old, and they can't hunt the property anymore. And they would certainly like to see it bought by the Conservation Trust so that it could be preserved. However, because they're not wealthy, and if you think about it, if you paid $250,000 20 years ago for a piece of property, you'd probably like it to appreciate it a bit. And frankly, it didn't appreciate as much as probably they hoped it would.
But what I'm saying, if I'm selling it to you, and I don't want it ever developed, right? If I'm saying, I never want this property developed.
Right.
So basically, you're saying, it's basically property that has no ability to be developed, because they're requesting that restriction.
They would like us to buy the fee simple and conserve it.
So
But they're not in.
so you still have the right, when you take title, you still have theoretically the right to split it.
Not after we take the state money, but.
Right, but you could propose
Yes.
potentially to the state that, look, we'll take this, it's an hourglass, 12, let's say you take 12 acres near the road.
Right.
And you say, okay, we're gonna allow that to be sold, not necessarily for affordable, which is to make a lot available to be sold, so the property could stay, maybe stay on the grand list, versus, and take the rest of the park and complete your core that you're trying to complete between the Mohawk Trail and Mohawk State Park.
Well, that would reduce the amount of, well, first of all, we're not in the business of developing property.
This would not be developing, just keeping it available to be
But
developed.
where would we get the money to buy that?
You could just turn around and sell it. You could
But we
raise
have to
money
pay-
internally.
But we have to pay for it in the first
You
place.
guys raise money all the time. I mean, you could raise money to buy that and then turn around and sell it, you know,
We can
to,
only raise money for our mission, which is to conserve land, not to develop land or speculate in developing.
but there could be
land.
more creative solutions. I'm asking you whether you've looked into a more creative solution to keep part on the grand list and part
Okay.
in conservation.
Right, I have thought about that, and this affordable housing aspect of it, I had thought, well, if the housing corporation could come up with enough to pay for the property closest to Johnson Road, perhaps we could work something where we'll buy everything except that, but I've been told the housing corporation doesn't have any money to buy that land. It would also create some difficulty with the seller because we said we were going to buy it and conserve it.
But if the town came back to you and said, go back to the drawing board, see what more you can
Okay,
get.
well, that's why I come back to the point that this is 12 acres of potentially developable land out of 5,700 acres that exist in Cornwall. And this is not an ideal spot for development, affordable housing. There's 23 acres behind the school that I think you all have looked at that's for sale. Not ideal, but if you were to put in, say, $100,000, I would recommend spending it, which was probably what it would cost to buy 12 acres on Johnson Road at least. I would say put the $100,000 into the property behind the school, which is much better for affordable housing. It's located within walking distance of the school. This is not in the center of town. It's going to be an isolated piece of property, and it is, so for those reasons.
I'm not proposing, personally, I'm not saying affordable housing. I'm saying just keep it on the grand list. Potentially get a house could be built there, more population, more people in the schools.
If
We're
there's
short of population and school children.
I
Okay.
think that would mess up our ability to get the money from the state and buy the land.
Is that because the deadline's too soon?
Well, we are applying for this, deadline is February 7th. We've spent about $10,000 already on appraisals, on an ecological survey of the property. It's ranked very high for conservation. And for us now to drop it would be, I think, a mistake, particularly since 12 acres out of 5,000, it's almost 9 square miles of land available in Cornwall that can be developed. And so why you're picking on us, so to speak, when we've got 12 acres out of 5,700 acres, I don't honestly understand it, given the conservation value of this property. It's, what you describe is possible, but it would not be our ability to do it now. We're going to the state, we've got a 72-acre parcel. For us to divide it into 12 acres and whatever the balance is, I don't know where we get the money for the 12 acres. I can't go to people saying, would you donate $100,000 to the Conservation Trust to speculate on land?
Okay,
Well, to
so,
fit in with the town plan, you're right.
Well,
so are there any other comments of, yes, Joanne?
You're right, I did bring this up originally because based on one night at the selectmen's meeting, we talked about the fact of what a good job Cornwall had done in conserving property over the years, and that it was now time to focus more on economic development and people. And my point was that this was the first item that came up, and I did not bring it up because of affordable housing or any kind of housing, but I brought it up because of the balance between more conservation or more focus on people and economic development. I mean, as you said, Bart, they paid $250,000 for it, but I believe they also sold a house and property, and then later on, they made a separate sale to the same people who bought the house for another 5 acres. So I believe they've got most of their original investment out of it. I don't know that there are 4 hunters living, their address is down in Easton, and it was a pretty expensive location. So I don't think they're exactly poverty stricken. But my point is that I think that if, as you say, only 12 acres are developable, that means that 60 of those acres are not going to be developable. And so they'll be the equivalent of conserved. So we can just leave them there. I don't see any huge, and we could probably consult our resident real estate agent, I don't see a huge run on empty property being bought. I don't think this is in danger. You know, we always say it's state money, it's not local money. The state only got money from the people in this room. They didn't write. Yes, they did print some of it, yeah, that's true. But basically, they got it from us. And we have to ask ourselves, is this the best use of our money? Is this property really in danger of development in a way where its conservation value is lost? You have said 60 acres will remain conserved without spending a cent of this money. And that's why I brought this up. Thank you.
Thank you.
I made 2 points.
Sure.
In 2017, we had an annual meeting of the Conservation Trust in which we discussed ways in which Cornwall could be both conserved, rural in character, but economically vital. And we had a number of people on the panel talking about ideas for Cornwall's economic vibrancy without sacrificing its unique character as a rural town. That's one thing. The second thing is, just like with the Trinity Church 300 acres, when that was for sale, one of the concerns I have is that besides making sure that that property would be conserved forever, some people made the same argument about that Trinity Forest. It's steep and deep, so why do you bother to save it? And the answer would be, if some rich person came along and fenced all of that in, not only would that prohibit the public from being in that forest, but it might also impede animals and other things. And so I see this conservation part as being very important to the environment and character of Cornwall, and not to actually take advantage of the low demand for land right now, and the availability of funds means we would not necessarily ensure the rural character of Cornwall going forward. We are very much in favor of economic vitality and using that rural character as a strength rather than a weakness.
Okay. Board comments?
I think the comment brought up at the end here is a critical comment, and that is public access is a key part of the conservation, the public access aspect of it. I mean, the animals moving across it is, I mean, they don't necessarily listen to fences or abide by fences,
Especially deer.
but people do more so. And you know, if the land was being used as hunting, to be hunted on, then the animals probably were avoiding it anyway. They didn't need the fences, I mean, whatever the purpose is. The issue of public access, I mean, I have heard that come up as a reason for this to be conserved, this and any other property in town. is public access to these properties. If they were privately owned, the private owner would have the right to restrict access. It's part of what goes with private ownership. But I think we keep talking about the critical aspect about this particular property. There is the hourglass nature of it, and there's two different pieces to it. I mean, to some degree, totally separate parcels that are connected by probably a 50-foot width band. And this being the critical aspect and this being less critical. I think it's a misrepresentation, true, but a misrepresentation to correlate the 12 acres that is a possible lot with the total acreage that's possibly buildable in the town of 5,000 or whatever the number that you're quoting. While true, it's a poor statement because much of that land is privately owned and not available, or relatively inaccessible, and would have much more difficulty to being developed in some kind of housing lot. So it's a difficult decision. I have a parcel that's on the market that has potential development to it, and then another piece of it that should be conserved.
Priscilla? Want me to go first? You can go first.
Well, as you know, I'm in the business. Land right now is a hard sale to the public. I think that our conservation department has done a wonderful job conserving land for public use. I wish there were monies for affordable housing. I don't see them available currently, and I don't see them affecting this development at all, unfortunately. Because of the location, the point was raised, it's not in the most desirable area for people who might be moving here with children to go to the school or to try to be more active in one of our quote-unquote town centers, Cornwall Bridge, West Cornwall, or the Village. So I have to confess that I'm beaten back on the idea of this being location for housing. I think it's nice that these three old gentlemen are going to make some profit. They're lucky they have Bart working for them and not Priscilla, because I couldn't sell this piece of land for them for $465,000. I say that flatly.
Okay. My thinking on this issue is still evolving. I'm open-minded on this particular piece and on the whole issue of balance and the town's future going forward. My thinking was jolted 2 years ago when I started reading the data that the town's population was declining for the first time in 80 years. And the data I've seen since that time has only reinforced that original data. In fact, Cornwall was one of the 4 towns of the 41 towns in the 5th congressional district that actually had less voters this time than we had 10 years ago. So we have this, I think that's sort of problem number one for me, and trying to, again, appreciate the work the Conservation Trust has done as our partner for a long-time partner in ensuring the real quality of life here in the town is very important. And I don't view this as a zero-sum game or housing versus conservation, but just looking at the trends in the pipelines for funding for open space, which does mean if land is preserved for open space permanently, it means no housing, affordable or market rate housing. And there are pipelines, federal, state, local, for non-housing, and there's scant money for housing, which is what the town needs. So we're in this dilemma and we have these awkward conversations. But that's where we're at in 2019. The one thing I did want to clarify was I did talk to Mag Cooley briefly today, and she said that I believe the talk of the town swapping land for land on 128, I don't believe that's on the table or possible at this point, so I don't think that's a consideration at this time. So, and again, I think if you look at the whole picture of where things have been going in the last 5 years, land protection has preserved hundreds of acres in Cornwall, and no land has been put towards affordable housing. One house per year on average is being built in town. So there's clearly a need for some sort of rebalance and doing things differently. And I think also my concern a little bit is permanent restriction as opposed to 490. I mean, once land is permanently deeded, that's what it says. It's permanent change. It's no longer, after 260 years, it's no longer, this land is no longer on the tax roll for the town. It's no longer available for housing or business or whatever else in the future the town may want to do with it. And I'm not at this point comfortable in the direction we're going enough to support this application. If it could come back and the land at the top was slated for preservation and the land at the bottom was available for housing, then I would support that. In the same way, I think the model of what Ted Dodd did up on Lake Road, where there was a couple lots for affordable housing, there was some land given to the trust to preserve land around the lake, and there was the beach land available for the town for recreation. To me, that's the kind of balance that was done, and I think, again, those lots are in a remote part of town. There are some school kids that go there, and I think you also find with the economics right now that most people who have kids school age are priced out of the villages. So most school buses are going to all the hilltops and remote parts of town to pick up school kids. So it's a very complicated issue that is going to take a lot of work to try to get Cornwall in a way that we're growing our population and we don't have a further decline. And I think that's one of the things we'll be talking about next Saturday, coming up.
Well, I gather that you're not going to support this application. And I will say that that's very disappointing. When you Google the town of Cornwall for affordable housing, you get no results. When you Google Salisbury for affordable housing, you get a whole list of resources. I think it's very unfortunate that you are now raising affordable housing as a crisis versus conservation. I think it's a both-and thing. I think we can work with the town. I think we are going to have a stronger town by preserving our rural character. I'd be very surprised if the town, as a matter of decision, says we want to be a suburb like Ridgefield or something like that. Furthermore, 16,000 acres are in PL 490. The taxes on this property are $196 a year. I think you're making a mistake not to support this. Nevertheless, we will go ahead with our application. It will be ranked lower than other towns, but I'm confident that this piece of property will be conserved.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the thing too, is
Sorry you can't support it.
Right, and again, we don't have the final say on all these things. We're elected officials, and we have to balance a lot of different things. But again, this application will go forward, so it's not like we're vetoing this purchase.
Well, I find it quite frustrating being a volunteer in the town that I'm working with a town plan that talks about the importance of conservation and then coming to the selectmen and being turned down for a piece of property that should be conserved. I just find that the direction of the town as expressed in the last plan of conservation and development supports conservation of land in Cornwall, and to come and work hard as a volunteer to support that and then come to the selectmen who are going to turn it down, I find quite frustrating. But nevertheless, we will prevail.
Right.
I have a few comments to make. One, I think it's difficult to use the town's assessment at 450, 475, whatever the number is.
622,000.
It could be any number. It could be 5 million,
That was
because
what Barbara got by
I
us
understand.
appraised.
I understand that that's what Barbara placed on it, but they're paying 490 taxes on it. So whatever price
$12,000.
whatever
assessed.
price Barbara puts on it doesn't touch their pocketbook. If my house was being appraised by the town for $3 million, I'd probably be upset. I would like the fact that my house would be valued at $3 million, because I'd say, show me the buyer. But I wouldn't want to be paying the taxes at $3 million, because I don't think my house is worth that. In the same way, I don't think this property is worth $400,000 or $600,000, and Barbara can place whatever value she wants on it, because the property has been applied for. The property has applied for 490 status, which it qualifies for, and pays virtually no taxes. My point is, the town's assessed value is relatively irrelevant because nobody is paying attention to it. And the owners love it because they can say, see, the town values at that price, so you have to pay me that price for it. I think we've heard that a land seller, a realtor in town, it seems like an incredibly high price, whether you have 2 appraisals for it or not. That's one comment.
You're saying Barbara Bikehaus's valuations are not valid?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that she does get feedback from residents. There's a Board of Assessment appeal. Residents can go to the assessor and say, I don't feel my property is assessed correctly. She may go back and look at it and say, you're right, I assessed it incorrectly. The Board of Assessment appeal is a whole another board that has the ability to change assessments. And because the assessment placed on this property does not directly affect the taxes being paid, there's no need for the property owner to be concerned about its value. That's sort of one train of thought I'm having. The other one is, what else? Was it just last year there was a previous property that came before the board?
100 acres across Furnace Brook that abuts Weontonock State Forest, owned by Alphonse Buddy Fletcher.
And that's that's being funded and moving
You
forward.
initially said you wouldn't support our application, then you said you would support our application. Thankfully, we ranked number 5 in the order of towns competing for this money, and as a result, we have a state grant awarded at $403,000 against the $622,000 purchase price, which again was a fair market appraisal by independent qualified appraisers.
On that particular property, it's my understanding that the first time that the Board of Selectmen heard about that was when the Conservation Trust presented that proposal to the board for its approval. And even though it'd probably been in the works for 6 months or 2 years And this property, the first time I'm hearing about it, maybe the Board of Selectmen in general, and is when the Conservation Trust is presenting a proposal to us to approve the concept for state funding. And I would contend or offer that maybe having other ideas in the mix before you come to us with a package that's already done. The package has been created and it's done, and it's possible that if the package had come to us earlier, way earlier, possibly in a different setting, that it would have been packaged in a different way.
Well, again, I come back to the plan of conservation and development. One of the points we made in our application was that it was consistent with the plan of conservation and development. If it's consistent with the plan of conservation and development, I don't understand on what basis you're saying it should be turned down.
Well, I think also if you go back, the plan of conservation, the one you're referring to, was adopted, I believe, in 2008, and this 2010. The board at that time, the Board of Selectmen, said we have problems with housing, we have problems with jobs, and that was not a focus of that plan of conservation development. In fact, that plan was almost all conservation. There was very little development and attention paid to the local economy and the housing problems. And let me finish. I'll let you talk. I'll let you talk.
Okay.
Let me finish. In there was a map that was put in there called the measles map that was put in there, and it said the town's going to be overwhelmed with housing, and in an attempt to scare people into thinking we had to do very stringent conservation measures. So what's happened in the last 10 years is the measles haven't broken out in Cornwall. In fact, we've had one house per year, not dozens, not hundreds. And so now the farther we go down this road, because we've lost 10 years on the economy and on housing, the more difficult it is for us to get out of a hole. The deeper you go in, the longer it takes you to go out. So that's how we're in a fairly awkward position at the present time. And that's why coming up we're going to have to do a much different plan of conservation development that again balances conservation with development and isn't strictly one or the other, which is what we got last time despite this board's attempt to get a balance. We didn't get a balance last time. But that was then. This is now going forward.
If you look at that plan, you will see there is one on housing that focuses on affordable housing and focuses on the need for the town to develop ways to finance affordable housing. In fact, it talks about having a town commission devoted to financing affordable housing. I gather in the 10 years since that was recommended, nothing has happened in that regard. But to say that the plan was totally in favor of conservation and ignored other aspects is not correct. And that's not what the Conservation Trust is proposing. You know that, you participated in our annual meeting in 2017 where we had Ingrid Allen and a whole bunch of people talking about ideas to make Cornwall vibrant without destroying its rural character. And I don't understand why I'm sure we're talking in the same direction in that regard. I know you're a farmer, you appreciate the rural character of Cornwall. I know you want it to be economically vital, so do I. There are creative ways we can work together to get this done. But I would implore you not to try and stop conservation while that happens. I think conservation can be an engine to help drive the vitality of this community.
This could have been a perfect property to split into. It could have been a win-win. A little bit of creativity would have been a win-win for everybody.
Okay, so anyway, I think we've talked about this for an hour, and
Yeah,
that's where we're at. And thank you, Bart, for your efforts, and thank you for everybody else. Okay, so any other thoughts on this? Okay, next we have the West Cornwall water septic letter to West Cornwall residents. We've got a draft that Richard wrote up. I did talk to Steve McDonald based on this letter, the draft there, where it does say there's preliminary average cost as determined by the engineer. The yearly fee would range from $3,000 to $5,000. That would be if all the cost would be borne by the 30 or 40 people using the system, which I think might be preventative from anybody actually signing up for this. So what I'm going to do is to get from the neighboring towns a estimate, or at least a record of what average user fees are for a municipal sewer system. Todd Piker has written the state to see whether the town can subsidize the cost of using a sewer system. But I think it, $5,000 a year, $4,000 a year, I think that's way above. The state average is like $1,000 a year, so I don't think it would fly with I don't think anybody's signing up to use the system. So again, before we send this out, I think we should get an idea of what the
A more realistic.
what the average
User
things
cost.
are, and then we'll get an idea of what the town financial responsibilities would be if the town does subsidize the system.
So, if there's two ways to come about a number, and one is, how much does it cost to run a system
Right.
for the year with 50 people on it? Is the same figure of whether there's 20 or 120, basically? Is that, and so you
Well,
just...
then you have the capital costs, the operation and maintenance costs. How many people do you have? What size system are you talking about? And that kind of stuff.
The figure you're quoting here is not just maintenance, it's the capital carrying
Right.
cost also.
Yeah. So,
So would that assume that 30 or 40 years down the road, a lot of that would be paid off?
right, the town would front the money, but then it would get it back in user fees, but it wouldn't have, I don't think it would, we could send this out, but I don't think we'd get a lot of positive
No, I-
responses to it. So again, we have to work on this a bit to figure out what what a reasonable figure is for people to pay, both for the hookup to the system and for a yearly fee for using it. And the unfortunate part, I read somewhere, I think Kent is working on a sidewalk program, and one of the things that's also shut down is the USDA, which finances these things. So it may take a little bit of extra work to find out some of the financial stuff, but I would think we would be able to get a figure from neighboring towns on what would be a average figure. Does that sound like a good way to proceed? And how much it normally costs to hook you up to a system, because I believe there's both things, and one of the things the board's going to have to wrestle with, or somebody's going to have to wrestle with, if they're people that say, no, we don't want to be part of the system, and they're in that sewer district or that sewer zone, what do they get charged, or do they not get charged?
And if they do get charged, at what level are they charged?
Correct.
The full amount or some partial amount?
Part of it, yeah. So,
I think that the figure here that Steve is quoting does need to be separated at some level as to capital part and sort of yearly maintenance, operating
Right.
part.
yeah,
Because once you're 20 years down the road, somebody buys a house there, they just, there is no hookup. You're either hooked up or you're not hooked up.
Yeah.
And then you're paying some amount.
Okay. Joanne, do you have a comment?
I wanted to ask you, since the committee was very hot to trot in having the selectmen send out the letter to West Cornwall residents on the subject, maybe the letter could be composed and ask people what they'd be willing to pay. If a system was to be put in, would you be interested in it if the pricing was, and then give a couple ranges? That would not only give us, you could still be doing all the homework you're going to do, but it would also give us some input from the thinking of the people about what they'd be willing to pay. Since we don't really know what it's going to cost, because we don't know whether ultimately we'll have an underground system or dumping into the river system, so they would be very different on the O&M costs. So we really, whatever number he gives us,
Right.
is sort of,
I think most people would like to play as little as possible,
yeah.
would be my answer.
We could ask people, would you be willing to sign up
Right.
if the annual fee was this?
Yeah.
And maybe give them 3 or 4 options.
But-
That would give the committee some feedback as to thinking, it's just an idea, so that we could get the letter out.
Well, I think we want to have, I want to hear back from Steve and some other towns. So we're putting out what is a realistic number, not, because I think the other answer too is the less people who use it pay, the more everybody else is going to have to pay who doesn't use it. So we want to find out what is typical for a town in the area, and I think we can get that pretty quickly. Okay, and I can definitely get all that information by the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay?
The sooner the better.
The sooner the better, and if we meet again, we can probably have the letter finished by the time the committee meets
Okay.
in February.
Well, we're meeting next week.
Yeah, we could. I'm not sure I'll have it that, but I'll probably have it for our next regular meeting. Then we have, next is Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission. They're meeting on the 26th. Karen's asked me to make some comments at the start of the meeting. And again, glad to pass along any thoughts the board has. Our standard thing is that the town's people may want to keep the town the same, but there's no doubt the town is changing, at least its demographics are changing. And there needs to be more housing and jobs, maintaining the quality of life here. And that we need to sort of reboot ourselves into the 21st century, look at what a sustainable town has many different facets as far as culture, environment, jobs, housing, economy. We need to hit all the bases, not just one or two. And again, I think people are pretty engaged on these subcommittees working on these things. Not everybody will agree on everything, but I think there is good civic engagement. Right now, the number we're working on is a population of 360 residents of Cornwall versus 470, I believe it's 5 years ago. So there has been that decline in year-round population.
360 full-time residents?
Yeah. So we've lost almost 100 residents in 5 years.
Oh,
That's full-time.
Full-time residents.
I don't think
Yeah.
I've
We're
heard
down
that.
to 360?
No, I'm sorry, 1,360.
Oh, I was gonna
It's not
say.
quite that catastrophic.
1360?
1,360.
Okay, that's a lot better, because I was really
Right.
getting a little worried there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
You're
I mean, I
right,
was
very
right.
important. Yeah.
Like, wow, I must have missed something.
And that meeting is this coming Saturday
This
from
coming
10 to
Saturday.
12.
10 to 12 at the school. Next, I was away, so you both went to a meeting of the Council of Small Towns and the Northwest Hills Council of Governments. Do you have anything to report on those meetings?
you know, at the Council of Small Towns meeting was an interesting meeting. There were several hundred people there. Priscilla and I sat with Bruce Adams, the first selectman from Kent, and Maria Horn. Nice to see her there. And there weren't too many legislators there.
No.
The
Maria Horn was there in the morning to greet, and she was the only one of the, I didn't see Craig Minor.
well, I don't think there were more than a half dozen
No.
legislators there. There was
There
just
used to
four
be
on the
better
panel.
legislative attendance, but not
The
recently.
governor was
Yeah,
not there.
the
You
governor didn't make it.
projected he might be, but
Right.
it was my first time. So all the exhibitors around the hall were interesting to me. And it was funny and also very pleasant. When people read my name tag, all it was my name and it said Cornwall. The lady who ran mattress recycling, she said, Cornwall, Ted Larson, he's marvelous to work with. That's our new dump master.
Right.
So of course when I came back and went to the dump, I went running over to tell Ted he got this great big compliment.
He's famous.
And Webster Bank, somebody there says, Cornwall, do you know Barbara Herbst? I said, I certainly do, you know me. But it was interesting to see the juxtaposition of these different exhibitors. And several of them had names that meant nothing to me. So I said, what is it you do? And they did all kinds of things. A lot of them were rehabbing, or if there were a fire or a flood, that kind of stuff. So Richard knows all this stuff, so he sat and visited with Bruce, and Priscilla ran around and got her little stubbies, and I won something at the end. I won a $50 Visa card that I can't find, but I thought that was very nice. But the location, it was like going to a castle surrounded by a moat, and it looked like the opening of
Oh,
a very fine cemetery.
You were at the AquaTurf.
AquaTurf in
AquaTurf, yeah.
Plantsville. If you ever need a place to drive by to see something fantastic, I recommend a drive to Plantsville. It was fun. I don't know that I learned a lot, but it was an interesting exposure.
I thought one of the interesting, the guy talking numbers in the morning, Kevin
Bloof.
from the CT Mirror,
Kevin
Was-
Fanoof.
was
the
referring
Mirror.
to sort of the state is heading in the wrong direction, and a lot's going to happen around 2022. A bunch of things will be coming due. He wasn't too. He didn't paint a pretty picture for the state's finances, and some work does need to be done on that. And I think that greets Lamont, and
Yeah.
that's what they're working on. Another interesting thing was, which is really talked about the Council of Governments, that there are 9 regional council of governments in the state, and that they're applying to the federal government to be able to access county funds, because the counties in the state of Connecticut were disbanded as a
It's a government.
governmental agency in 1960. So the COG is going to be applying, the state COG will be applying to be able to access county funds from the federal government. And I think that will be several years in the making to happen, but I think that's a great idea, and the potential for county funds
To flow again
to flow again, yeah, to be
from the
accessed by
federal
the state
government,
state
which
of
we don't
Connecticut.
have
Right.
any of that now without having a county government.
I think that seemed to be the most interesting thing, positive thing that I heard.
And you can find places like Torrington can't get funding because they're too big but too small to fit a lot of programs, so they're
Yeah.
gonna work on that.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you both for going to those things, staying on top of things. Next is tax refund. Joyce, do you have that information? So there's a tax refund for $129.41 to VW Credit Leasing for overpayment of motor vehicle tax. So I'll make a motion. We do that. So,
Second.
any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. The next thing we have is a budget transfer, $2,000 out of unallocated capital interest earnings for the West Cornwall wastewater study. So I'll make a motion that we prove that. That would complete the money that's needed by Steve McDonald, WMC Engineers, to do his study. Want that one?
I got that. I think Is this the same one? Or
Same one,
No.
yeah, it's 2 copies
Is
of
it?
the same one,
Do you
yeah.
need 2 copies of it?
Okay.
No,
No, just the one that's good.
okay.
Is there a second for Gordon's motion?
Sure,
Second.
second.
We got the same thing. Next, we have
Everybody in
a,
favor of that?
What was that?
Aye?
Aye.
right.
You tell.
Request for the transfer station for used container. Salisbury had a container for sale, could have been used for tires, however, they've already sold it, so that's no longer available. So if we do see another
Okay.
container,
Holy cow.
we do have some funds in transportation or transfer station equipment. I don't know how much, but we could buy it if we get another deal on a closed container. So easy come, easy go, I guess. Next we have Highway Union contract sign off. And this is a contract we negotiated
Last year?
earlier.
Yeah.
And the Highway Union has 3 members, and
Which part of this is from, this was last year's?
last year's the union just brought it up to date as far as the language.
Did we never sign it last year?
We didn't get a clean copy, so here's our clean copy.
Did you guys agreed on it, and then now we finally
Yeah.
put the new details in and ready?
Oh, okay. Then this
Is
isn't
the one you
like,
agreed on back in July or
there
August?
wasn't
Yeah.
any opener or anything like that, reopener or any of that. This is just, I'll get a pen working this time. And maybe I'll take that one. We need to sign 3 copies, is that what this is?
Yeah,
One for us, one for them,
and
and
one for the local.
so where are we signing?
For the town of Cornwall, I can sign first, you can sign second, or Priscilla can sign third. So our tax delinquency part of the meeting will be in executive session. So if there's many more public comments, we have another section of public comments. If anybody has anything else to say. Joanne?
I'd like to put my name forward for appointment to P and Z, since I understand Peter has officially resigned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll try to advertise that position. There are a couple other vacancies that we should put out
I
there.
couldn't hear what that was.
Joanne volunteered to be on planning and zoning.
Oh, good.
So what I would propose is we publicize, there's a couple of other positions that we need to housekeep on, so we can put those out in the Chronicle and see what happens.
Okay.
So, any other comments? Okay, thank you all for coming.